Welcome in, where the clocks tick slowly and flowers bloom by moonlight. A garden hidden behind gears and quiet tea. And time begins to grow. In a quiet, slumbering valley, cradled by velvet green hills and silver-threaded brooks, there lay a village with skies that never turned to night. The place was called Everdawn, and there, the light was always soft, as though the sun had paused just after waking. The morning stretched on like a pleasant sigh, golden and gentle, and the days passed without any rush at all. The homes in Everdawn were built from stones smoothed by time and stories, their windows trimmed with lace curtains that fluttered like moth wings in the breeze. Climbing roses crowned every windowsill, and the streets were paved with cobbles that remembered every footstep, murmuring quietly beneath the soles of passers-by. In this serene village, time moved at a rhythm unlike any other. The clocks ticked slowly, their hands gliding over their faces like drifting petals. Nothing was hurried, no market stall, no garden gate, no kindly old woman feeding the birds by her porch. Even the crows cawed in long, yawning tones, as if they too knew there was no need to race through the hours. And in the center of the village, nestled between an apothecary that smelled of mint and a bookshop that never closed, stood a little shop with a crooked chimney and a roof of mossy green tiles. Its window displays shimmered with curious little objects, gilded hourglasses, teacups that stirred themselves, and silver chimes that played songs no one could quite name. Above the door, in curling gold script, a sign read, "The Clockmaker's Garden." The villagers often wondered what lay behind the ivy-covered walls of the clockmaker's home, for few had ever stepped beyond his gate. But none were truly curious in a pressing way, for in Everdawn, mystery was as natural as the mist that curled through the fields at dawn. It was enough to know that something wondrous was there, quietly ticking along in its own time. And so the days passed in their gentle rhythm, and the bells in the village tower chimed like lullabies, always soft, always slow. The clockmaker of Everdawn was a man named Mr. Ellery, and he was not like others, not quite. He moved with the deliberate grace of one who had listened to the secret language of minutes and learned not to interrupt them. His hair, the color of frost on moonlit rooftops, curled softly around his ears, and he wore a waistcoat stitched with threads that shimmered faintly in starlight. His spectacles were always sliding gently down his nose, and when he smiled, it felt like remembering a song from childhood. Though many owned clocks in Everdawn, none truly needed them. Still, they brought them to Mr. Ellery for gentle winding, for polishing, for the sheer comfort of hearing him hum as he worked, always some tune no one recognized, yet everyone loved. Children often peeked through his windows, watching the tiny brass gears turn in his skilled hands like tame fireflies. Behind his shop was a door, small, arched, and painted green, set into a wall of flowering vines. No one but Mr. Ellery passed through it, though sometimes, if the wind blew just so, the villagers would catch the scent of something strange and lovely, jasmine and wild honey, perhaps, or the crisp scent of new snow in early spring. For behind that door lay his garden, but not a garden of mere plants. It was a place where time itself grew. There were trees shaped like hourglasses, their trunks narrow at the center and wide at the top and base, their leaves turning color not with seasons, but with moods. Vines curled along trellises in patterns that echoed celestial maps, and flowers bloomed only when someone nearby recalled a moment too tender for words. There was a fountain that dripped in intervals of perfect silence, and a stone path that shifted subtly depending on the thoughts of those who walked it. And in the center of it all stood a sundial carved from crystal, its shadow moving only when someone made a choice they had been long delaying. To this place, Mr. Ellery would retreat each evening as the soft light deepened. He would hum to the growing things and speak to the silence, planting seeds in the soil with names like memory, wonder, and stillness. He had once told a child, quite seriously, "I don't just keep time. I grow it. Bit by bit, petal by petal." And though the child had laughed, they had never forgotten it. One day, as the sun rested low behind the hills, painting the sky with the palest shades of coral and pearl, a stranger wandered into Everdawn. Her steps stirred no dust, and her breath steamed in the cool hush of the twilight hour. She wore a long cloak the color of distant clouds over the sea, and it fluttered softly about her ankles as if it remembered how to fly. Her name was Leora. She carried no bundle upon her back, only a small leather-bound journal, worn smooth with time, and a pocket watch that did not tick. Its face was silver-veined and gently tarnished, and its hands, delicate as a sleeping bird's feet, were locked forever at midnight. She held it not like a possession, but like something borrowed from long ago. Leora had wandered far, through deserts where sand whispered secrets, through forests where the trees bent to listen, through cities that shimmered with lights yet felt hollow to the soul. And in each place, she asked only one question: "Do you know where I belong?" None had answered. Not truly. Not in the way that made her heart grow still. But something about Everdawn, its hush, its warm light, the bells that sang instead of striking, made her slow her steps. Her breath softened. Her hands stopped trembling. And though she did not know why, she felt, at last, that she had reached not the end of a path, but the beginning of one she could walk with peace. She wandered through the quiet lanes until she reached the little shop with the crooked chimney and the soft golden light in its windows. Something about it shimmered with the feeling of forgotten lullabies. She placed her hand upon the door, just as it creaked gently open. And there stood Mr. Ellery, smiling softly as if he had been expecting her for many, many years. Inside, the shop smelled of old paper, warm honey, and the faint scent of rain on stone. The clocks on the walls ticked in strange harmonies, some slow, some nearly still, as though marking time for trees, rivers, and dreams. Leora sat on a little velvet stool beside the hearth, and across from her, Mr. Ellery poured tea into cups painted with constellations. She told him her story, not all at once, but in quiet pieces, like threads woven into cloth. She spoke of the pocket watch that had never moved. Of how it was given to her as a child by someone whose face she no longer remembered, only the sound of their voice, whispering, "When this watch begins to tick again, you'll know where you belong." She had kept it close ever since. Through long nights beneath the stars, through silent inns where no one asked her name, through moments of stillness that felt both comforting and lonely. Mr. Ellery listened with the care of someone who understood silence better than speech. And when she had finished, he held out his hand. "Come," he said softly, like an invitation in the wind. He led her through the little green door behind the shop, into the garden that did not grow with seasons, but with feelings, moments, and quiet wonder. There, beneath a tree whose branches bent like the hands of dancers, Mr. Ellery knelt and brushed the earth with his fingertips. From a jar by the sundial, he took a single seed, glowing faintly with a light not quite gold, not quite silver. He placed it in Leora's hand. "This is a moment seed," he said. "It grows not from soil alone, but from stillness, remembrance, and hope. Plant it here, with your watch. Let time rest for a while. Let it grow." So, with trembling fingers, Leora dug a small hollow in the warm earth. She wrapped her pocket watch in the corner of her cloak and laid it gently in the hollow, placing the glowing seed beside it. As she covered them with soil, the breeze sighed through the garden, as though something unseen had exhaled at last. They did not speak as they stood. No words were needed. The clocks in the distance ticked more slowly still, and a new bloom, tiny and blue, began to swell gently beneath the earth. The garden changed, though only slightly. It was the kind of change one might not notice at first glance, like a sigh between thoughts or a hush falling deeper into silence. Yet, to Leora, it felt as though the air had grown warmer. The colors more tender. The light had softened further still, as though it had remembered something long forgotten. The soil where the seed lay seemed to breathe, rising and falling ever so faintly, like the chest of a sleeping child. Mr. Ellery said little, but each morning and every twilight, he would walk with Leora among the time-grown things. They passed beneath canopies of quiet leaves that shimmered without wind, along cobblestone paths that curved differently each day, and beside ponds where lily pads opened in time with her heartbeat. It felt as though the garden was listening to her, shaping itself around her presence, not hurriedly, not forcefully, but with the slow, wise patience of the stars. She began to write again. In the leather-bound journal she had once carried more out of memory than purpose, her pen now moved with calm assurance. She filled the pages with fragments, dreams, small wonders, the taste of the air at dusk, the sound of petals falling on water. And always, she returned to the place beneath the tree, where the seed had been planted. There, the tiniest sprout had pushed through the earth. Its stem glimmered faintly, not with color but with feeling. And at its base, if one looked closely, the very edge of her pocket watch peeked out, a quiet gleam in the dark soil. It had not ticked yet. But Leora no longer waited for it. She simply sat nearby, watching bees hum without haste, watching the leaves turn with stories she couldn't yet name. And time, too, began to grow. One morning, when the mist was especially thick and the garden shimmered like the edge of a dream, Mr. Ellery paused at the base of the clock tree. He turned to Leora with a twinkle behind his spectacles, then knelt and pressed his palm to the ground. The roots of the tree stirred. The earth did not break or groan, it parted, gently, like fabric pulled aside to reveal a forgotten book. A staircase of polished wood spiraled downward beneath the roots, lit by tiny lanterns that bobbed without flame. Leora followed, her hand brushing the moss-covered rail as she descended. Below, beneath the garden and the earth and all the hours above, lay a library. It had no walls, only arches woven from branches and air. The shelves were carved from living wood, and the books that lined them hummed with the quiet murmur of sleeping thoughts. Some books fluttered their pages like wings. Others glowed with a soft bioluminescence, like seashells caught in moonlight. "This," Mr. Ellery whispered, "is the library of moments." He walked slowly between the shelves, his fingers brushing the spines. Every time someone remembers a feeling fully, without rushing past it, without wishing it away, it becomes a page. And every page becomes part of this. Leora wandered through the aisles, her breath held gently in her chest. She found a book bound in feathers that opened to a memory of rain on glass. Another wrapped in bark, filled with sketches of dreams had by an old man in a rocking chair beside the sea. Each book pulsed with quiet life, and when she paused beside one shelf, a slender volume slipped out and fell softly into her hands. It had no title, only a blue ribbon threaded through its spine. She opened it. Inside were her own words. The ones she had written in her journal. The ones she had whispered to the garden in the hush before dawn. The laughter she had shared with Mr. Ellery when a hummingbird had mistaken her hair for a nest. Leora smiled, a smile that came not from happiness, but from belonging. "It's growing," said Mr. Ellery, eyes twinkling. "Your time. Not the ticking sort. The living sort." As the days passed, though no calendar marked them and no clock counted their turning, the sprout by the old clock tree grew taller. Its leaves shimmered like polished jade, and small buds began to form, each one shaped like a teardrop of glass, swaying slightly even when the air was still. Leora returned to it each morning, cup of tea in hand, wrapped in the same cloud-blue cloak she had worn upon her arrival. But it no longer felt like a traveler's garment. It had softened, as if the threads themselves had loosened their grip on restlessness. One morning, just as the sun slipped its golden fingers over the hills, one of the buds opened with a sound, soft and round and perfectly clear. Ding! It was a bell. A living bellflower, pale blue and glowing faintly from within. And the sound it made was not loud, it was tender, like a memory returning without sorrow. Leora knelt beside it, heart still, breath hushed. The watch had moved. Only slightly, barely more than a whisper of a second, but its hands had shifted at last. Midnight had broken. Time, it seemed, was not something she had needed to chase or wait for. It had come to her quietly, blooming through patience and stillness, like the bellflower blooming in silence. From that day forward, more blossoms opened, each chiming softly at moments that could not be marked by ordinary hours, when a leaf landed on her shoulder, when a thought warmed her chest, when a breeze carried a scent she had not smelled since childhood. These, Mr. Ellery explained, were her own hours. Her own kind of time. Not bound to the old hands of the watch but grown from within. And though the watch now ticked, slow as a heartbeat in sleep, Leora no longer watched it with longing. Instead, she listened for the bells among the flowers and wrote each moment into her journal. One evening, when the stars came early and the mist kissed the ground like an old friend, Mr. Ellery brought Leora to a part of the garden she had never seen before. It lay beyond a row of dreaming trees, where the air felt softer, almost like breath, and the path beneath their feet was woven, not from stone or wood, but from ribbons of light and velvet moss. The path shimmered with colors that changed as she walked, periwinkle, silver, the golden pink of dawn just before it fades. "This is the path of woven days," Mr. Ellery said quietly. "Not many reach it. It only appears when someone has lived in stillness long enough to see time not as something that passes, but as something that waits." Leora walked slowly, her fingertips grazing the air. Along the path, there were scenes woven into the spaces around her, not visions, but feelings, suspended like droplets of dew. She passed moments she had forgotten, a childhood smile, the way her mother once brushed her hair beneath a tree, the sound of someone's laughter in the distance long ago. The further she walked, the more she realized, these were not only her memories. They were the garden's memories too. The land remembered each guest, each whisper, each pause where someone had once found peace. At the end of the path stood a mirror, not of glass, but of still water, encircled by moonflowers. It showed not her reflection, but her presence, her essence, made of every moment she had lived slowly, fully, without fear. She stepped closer. The image shimmered, then cleared. Her watch appeared in the surface of the water, now ticking gently, its hands circling not around numbers, but around tiny drawings, a teacup, a tree, a cloud, a star, and a bellflower. Time had become her own. Leora turned to Mr. Ellery, who stood with his hands folded behind his back, watching her with eyes that held centuries of softness. "Now," he said, "you may choose to stay, or you may choose to carry this time wherever you go. The garden will always welcome you. But it does not hold you." Leora looked at the path behind her, then at the mirror of water, then at the blooming sky above. She smiled. Leora stayed in Everdawn a little longer. Not because she needed to. Not because she was lost. But simply because her footsteps no longer asked to leave. The restlessness that once hummed in her chest like a distant drum had grown silent, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of belonging to the present. Each day, she and Mr. Ellery tended the garden, not in the way one tends ordinary plants, but in the way one tends memories. They whispered to the growing time vines. They brushed the dust from the sundial with soft cloths dipped in morning dew. They read from books in the library of moments, sharing passages aloud like pieces of starlight passed hand to hand. And one afternoon, beneath the shade of a clock tree that ticked in rhythm with the breeze, Mr. Ellery handed her a box. It was made of smooth walnut wood, bound with gentle curves and sealed with a tiny latch shaped like a crescent moon. Inside lay a clock unlike any she had ever seen. Its face was clear crystal, but there were no numbers. Instead, tiny symbols lined the edge in a spiral, a ripple in a pond, a feather, a flickering candle, a curled cat in sleep, and many others too subtle to describe. The hands were made from slender strands of silver vine, and as they turned, they didn't tick, but moved as though dancing, curving in gentle arcs without sound. "This," said Mr. Ellery, "is a slower clock." Leora touched it with reverence. "It doesn't measure time," he said, "but honors it. It moves when the soul is ready. It turns not with the hours, but with wonder." She held it to her ear. And for the first time, she heard not ticking, but breathing. Like wind through tall grass. Like the hush before snowfall. Like the world exhaling in peace. She held it close to her chest, and it matched the rhythm of her heart. One morning, not long after the gift of the slower clock, Leora rose with a quiet certainty in her bones. She stood beneath the old tree where the bellflowers now bloomed like stars clinging to branches. The watch, once silent, now gently humming with life, glowed faintly in the fold of her cloak. She did not feel sadness. Not quite. It was something softer than that. A kind of fullness that comes before change. The moment before a candle is blown out, not for loss, but for rest. She found Mr. Ellery beside the sundial, his hands folded, his eyes closed, as though listening to the roots beneath the earth. He opened his eyes as she approached and smiled, not with surprise, but with knowing. "You're ready," he said, simply. "I think I am," Leora replied, her voice carrying no tremble. He handed her a small pouch tied with a silver thread. "Moment seeds," he said. "Enough for a lifetime. Plant them wherever you feel stillness. The garden will find you again, wherever you are." She took them gently, holding the pouch as though it might sing. "And this," he added, gesturing to the path behind her, "will remain open. Always. Gardens don't close their doors. They just wait." Leora turned once more to the place that had changed her in ways she could not name, the mist-wrapped trees, the flower chimes, the library of remembered things. She did not say goodbye. She simply stepped forward, the slower clock ticking gently against her heart. And as she passed through the garden's gate, something extraordinary happened. The garden moved with her. Not all at once. Not in vines or roots. But in the way the air shimmered softly around her, in the way birdsong settled near her feet, in the way the stones beneath her soles seemed to hum, ever so faintly, with time's quiet breath. For once one has walked in a place of stillness, that stillness walks with them. Leora walked for many days, though no map guided her, and no signpost told her where to turn. She did not need such things anymore. For the path unfolded softly beneath her feet, shaped not by distance, but by stillness. Wherever she paused, on mossy riverbanks, beneath archways woven from ivy, in candlelit rooms where strangers offered tea and silence, she planted her moment seeds. She did not speak often. But when she did, it was with a voice that carried the hush of ever dawn in its tone. She told stories of a garden where time grew like vines. Of a clockmaker who could mend not only gears, but memory. Of a pocket watch that began ticking only when it was no longer needed to. And wherever she went, something subtle began to change. In a bustling village, a bellflower appeared in the cracks of a stone path, chiming quietly at dusk. In a city of hurried feet, a stray dog lay beneath a tree that had not stood there the day before, tail wagging in rhythm with something unseen. In a lighthouse that had long stood silent, the wind began to whisper lullabies through the shutters. And those who passed by, those who were quiet enough, began to feel it. The feeling of soft time. Of breathing clocks. Of hours made from wonder, not worry. They did not know Leora's name. They did not know where she had come from. But they remembered the stillness she left behind, the way a dream lingers long after waking. And slowly, the world became gentler in her wake. Years passed. Or perhaps they didn't. In the realm of slower clocks, time folds rather than stretches. What mattered was not the counting, but the listening. One evening, long after she had left Everdawn behind, long after the pocket watch had become as much a part of her as breath, Leora found herself standing once more in a field of hush and heather, with the sky painted in soft strokes of rose and lavender. Before her stood the gate. The same crooked gate covered in ivy, gently swaying in the breeze. And beyond it, the garden. It had grown. There were new paths now, winding in shapes she had never seen. New trees bowed their silver heads, welcoming her without words. New bellflowers chimed not just in one corner, but all across the garden, like a psalm long held back now finally sung. Mr. Ellery stood by the sundial, looking no older, no younger. Some people, after all, belong to time in a different way. He smiled, but did not speak. He didn't need to. She walked with him, once more, through the paths of wonder. Past the library, where a new wing now whispered with pages that bore her hand. Past the pond where stars came to rest on the surface at night. Past the place where her watch had once been planted, now a full bellflower tree, its roots glowing softly with remembered peace. They sat together on a stone bench near the edge of the garden, beneath the sky that never fully turned to night. And in that quiet moment, the watch at her chest gave one final, perfect sound. Tick. Then silence again. Not the silence of ending, but the silence of fullness. Of return. And as the wind passed over the garden, carrying the scent of jasmine, wood smoke, and stories yet unwritten, a soft truth settled into the earth, into the leaves, into the breath between one heartbeat and the next. That time, when tended with love, does not pass. It blooms. Come softly, to a place where fog hides what hearts have forgotten. A lantern flickers, shadows return. And silence begins to speak. Far beyond the mountain teeth, where clouds often lay like forgotten quilts on hillsides, there was a village no map had ever shown. It was called Thistledown, though no one who lived there could say exactly why. The air in Thistledown was always still, and every house was made of pale stone, washed soft by fog that drifted in every morning, and never truly left. In Thistledown, no shadows fell on the ground. Trees had no silhouettes, and footsteps left no outline of darkness behind them. The sun hung, distant and diffused, behind layers of mist so fine they sparkled like powdered stars. Light came in soft waves, never glaring, never sharp, and it made every shape look gentle around the edges, as though nothing was ever truly finished. The people of Thistledown moved quietly. They spoke in voices tuned to silence and walked with the kind of care that made even the cobblestones seem grateful. There was no rush, no noise, no harshness. Even the bells in the village tower chimed only when absolutely necessary, and then only once, low and long, like the sigh of a well-read book closing. No one in Thistledown minded the absence of shadows. They had lived this way for so long that the idea of shade and darkness seemed like something out of a bedtime story, something told to children to explain why the sky changed, or why firelight danced. But one day, an old man arrived. He walked with a cane carved from driftwood and carried nothing but a small satchel and a lantern that did not glow. He did not speak at first, and the villagers, being polite, did not ask. But when he passed beneath the birch trees that grew beside the schoolhouse, something curious happened. For the first time in the memory of the village, the trees cast shadows. The man took a small room at the inn on the edge of Thistledown, the one with the lace curtains and the ivy that climbed without a sound. He paid with a silver coin that looked older than the stones of the village square, and he asked only for quiet, tea, and a place near the window. The villagers were curious, but kindly. They left him to himself, though eyes peeked through kitchen shutters and children paused mid-hop to watch him as he passed. Always, he walked with the same soft rhythm, tap of his cane, shuffle of his feet, the gentle sway of his unlit lantern at his side. And wherever he walked, the fog seemed to thin just slightly. Not disappear, no, but lighten. And as it lightened, shadows began to bloom softly behind the things they'd long forgotten. A cat lying on a windowsill grew a long, stretching shape beside it. A weather vane spun gently with the whisper of contrast. The trees once blurred by mist began to show their limbs more clearly. At first, this unsettled the villagers. "It isn't natural," whispered the baker to the weaver, as they watched the man pass beneath the stone arch near the fountain. But the shadows did not threaten. They simply were. Gentle outlines. Soft echoes of form. They brought shape, not fear. And something deep within the villagers began to stir, like a melody remembered from a dream. Still, no one knew what the lantern was for. Each evening, the man would sit on the bench near the schoolhouse, place the lantern beside him, and open a notebook with pages covered in small, perfect handwriting. He would write for hours without looking up, while the fog curled around his ankles like a patient pet. The lantern remained unlit. Yet it glowed faintly, not with flame, but with something else. A memory, perhaps. Or a question. And the villagers, though they dared not ask aloud, all wondered the same thing. What was he bringing into the light? As the days passed, the villagers of Thistledown began to adjust to the strangeness. Where once no shadows had fallen, now they lengthened softly behind wagons, curled around booths, and stretched lazily from porch steps at twilight. Yet nothing about them felt heavy or dark. They were quiet companions, as if the village had been slightly translucent before, and was now becoming real. No one questioned the old man directly. Adults, as they often do, tucked their curiosity into small, safe boxes marked later or not my place. But the children, the children were different. They watched the man carefully from the edge of hedgerows and under low eaves. They followed at a respectful distance as he walked through the narrow lanes and along the fog-laced edge of the river. They noted how he always paused at certain corners, how he sometimes murmured to the lantern though it gave no reply. One child, a boy with a coat 2 sizes too big and a pebble always in his pocket, dared to speak. "What's inside it?" he asked softly one morning, when the man paused by the weeping willow. The old man looked down at the boy with kind, unreadable eyes. His beard was thin and silver, and his breath smelled faintly of mint and ink. "Not what," he said, "but when." And he walked on. The children pondered this deeply. Some believed he meant the lantern was a sort of clock. Others whispered that it held a memory from the future. One girl, who spent long afternoons braiding mist into her hair, insisted the lantern was filled with a question no one had yet dared to ask. None of them were frightened. The shadows were too gentle for fear. And the man never took, never pushed, never asked for anything. He simply walked, and slowly, the world became more itself. One morning, a curious thing occurred. The fog pulled back a little further than usual. Only by a breath, but enough to reveal something new, a house that no one remembered building. It sat at the edge of the village, just past the alder grove where children once played hide and seek. It had not been there before. Of that, everyone was certain. And yet, it looked as though it had always belonged, its stones mossy, its shutters weathered, its garden overgrown with silver-leaved herbs. The villagers gathered near, but not too close. They stood with hands in pockets, scarves around throats, eyes wide with questions they dared not shape into words. Then the old man came. He stepped through the gathering quietly, not parting it, but passing through it like wine through tall grass. He opened the gate, hinges creaking with the sound of something long overdue, and entered the house. He did not lock the door. For the rest of the day, and into the twilight, a single light shone in the front window. Not a candle. Not a bulb. But a glow very like that of the lantern he carried, soft, constant, and filled with stillness. From that evening onward, each villager began to remember something they had not thought of in years. A song sung to them in childhood. A feeling they once had while watching rain slide down glass. A scent, long gone, of cinnamon and old paper. The house, it seemed, did not appear to give answers. Only echoes. And in the quiet warmth of those echoes, something began to settle inside each person, as gently as dust on a windowsill. After the old man entered the house at the edge of the village, things did not change quickly. Thistledown, being a place of slow unfolding, accepted the strangeness as it accepted mist, without question, without resistance. But a few days later, something curious happened. The door of the house, once closed, now stood slightly ajar. No announcement was made. No sign hung from the latch. Yet the villagers understood, in the way one understands a melody without needing to know its name, that they were being invited. Not all at once. Not in crowds. One at a time. And so it began, quietly. A widow with silver-threaded hair stepped through the gate and into the dim glow of the lantern's light. She stayed inside for nearly an hour, then emerged with tear-lined eyes and a strange, peaceful smile. The next day, the baker entered. Then the watchmaker. Then a boy who had stopped speaking years ago, and came out humming. Inside the house, they said, there were many rooms, but one in particular was unlike the rest. It was called the room without corners. No one knew who named it. Perhaps the house had always known what it was. The room had no harsh lines, no edges. Its walls curved like the inside of a shell, painted in colors no one could quite describe, colors that reminded people of things rather than objects. One said it was the color of feeling safe. Another said it was the color of memory before it formed. In that room, people heard things they had forgotten. Not voices. Not sounds. But impressions. A grandmother's lullaby sung through a wool scarf. The hush of snowfall on their birthday. The exact silence of a book being closed after a favorite chapter. And there, in the very center of the room, the old man would sit with his lantern, still unlit, yet glowing. He never spoke unless spoken to. But when he did, his words were never instructions, never declarations. Only reflections. "You're not lost," he said once to a girl whose hands never stopped trembling. "You're simply walking through your own shadow." At the center of Thistledown stood a bell tower. It was tall and slender, rising like a finger pointing gently toward the sky. Built of pale stone and lined with ivy, the tower had stood for centuries. Yet the bell at its top had not rung in living memory. The villagers had almost forgotten its purpose. Some said it had never been meant to ring at all, that it was just part of the sky's silhouette. Others said it would toll only at the end of time, when all the clocks of the world had stopped ticking. But one afternoon, as the fog curled lazily around rooftops and the village was quiet with the hush of tea and knitting, the bell rang once. Only once. It was not loud. It did not echo. It simply occurred. Like a single drop falling into a pond. The sound drifted over the houses, over the market stalls, over the riverbank where cats slept in baskets. And in its wake, people paused. Not in fear, but in stillness. Those who had entered the house looked at one another and nodded, as if something inside them had recognized the sound. Those who had not yet gone found themselves drawing slightly nearer to the gate, curious in a new, quieter way. And the old man, seated by his lantern, looked up at the sky and smiled, not because something had ended, but because something had gently turned. For the bell, like the lantern, was not a signal. It was a recognition. Something was waking. Not the village, not the people, but something beneath both. Something long asleep that lived in stillness, and breathed in time. Not long after the bell rang, another figure arrived in the village. She came without sound, walking barefoot on the cobblestones as if she had always known their rhythm. Her hair was dark with threads of silver woven through like morning frost on raven's wings, and she carried with her a small broom bound with violet string. No one saw her arrive. She was simply there. Some believed she had stepped from the same fog that curled through the hills. Others said she had come from the house itself, born of its breath and silence. But no one questioned her, for her presence was like the scent of lavender in old books, comforting, familiar, and quietly powerful. She was known only as the keeper of unswept corners. Each day, she walked slowly through Thistledown, sweeping places most had forgotten, the corners beneath staircases, behind doorways long sealed, under the benches where shadows now gathered gently like resting cats. She never hurried. Her broom made no sound. When asked what she was doing, she would reply only, "Making room for what we don't yet know we remember." People began to notice small changes after she passed. Letters they had meant to write appeared, already sealed in their own handwriting. A lost button would reappear, already sewn onto a coat. A melody hummed in sleep would be found again in a dusty music box, left unopened for years. The keeper did not speak to the old man. Not openly. But they crossed paths often. And when they did, they would bow slightly to one another. Not as strangers, but as those who had waited a very long time to meet. The house at the edge of the village was growing. Not larger in shape, but deeper in meaning. As more villagers entered its quiet rooms, more rooms began to appear, each one reflecting something the visitor had not known they needed. One room held only quilts, stitched with forgotten names, soft as breath, warm as lullabies. Another was filled with half-finished drawings, suspended in the air, slowly completing themselves as someone remembered them. But the most mysterious room of all was known as the room of gently closed doors. It was a long corridor, lit with lanterns like the one the old man carried. Along its length stood many doors, each one different, some carved from driftwood, others wrapped in ivy, a few no more than curtains of wind. Each door was closed, but not locked. Visitors walked slowly through this room, drawn not by curiosity, but by familiarity. And sometimes, without understanding why, someone would pause before a particular door, and open it. Behind each door was not a scene, not a person, not even a memory. But a moment. A single, quiet, essential truth. Something simple, yet impossibly profound. The scent of their mother's coat after rain. The feel of their childhood bed in the early morning. The sound of someone laughing in a kitchen, long ago. Each person saw something different. And when they closed the door behind them, they did not forget what they saw. They simply carried it more gently. No one ever opened more than one door. No one ever asked if they could. The house seemed to know, one memory at a time, is enough. And through it all, the old man sat with his lantern, watching the shadows shift, not in darkness, but in shape. As if the village, at long last, was remembering how to be whole. There was an elder tree in thistledown, growing at the bend of the river where the water moved slow and the reeds whispered quietly even when there was no wind. It had always been there, though no one remembered planting it. Its roots curled deep into the earth like long-forgotten lullabies, and its branches arched overhead like the reaching arms of an old friend. No one dared cut it, nor carve into it, nor hang lanterns from its limbs. It was sacred, not by rule, but by feeling. After the appearance of the keeper and the awakening of the house, the old man began spending his afternoons beneath that tree, sitting on a worn wooden bench that had not been there the day before. Each day, someone would join him. Never the same person twice, and never more than one. They would sit beside him, the lantern resting between them, and they would speak, or not speak. It didn't seem to matter. Some came with questions. Others with silence. Some wept, some laughed, and some simply breathed for a while. The old man never offered advice. He never pointed the way. He only listened. And in his stillness, something would always soften. Words would come more easily. Tears would dry more quickly. A memory, once sharp with ache, would return with warmth. The villagers began to call the bench the listening place. And soon, even those who had once feared their own shadows began to visit. Because what the lantern offered was not light in the ordinary sense. It was recognition. Not of what had been lost, but of what had always quietly remained. One evening, the fog in Thistledown changed. It did not vanish, it never would, but it began to glow faintly, as if holding light within itself, rather than obscuring it. It no longer blurred edges but softened them with intention, like a painter choosing where not to place detail. People began to walk through it without hesitation. They found their steps more sure, their thoughts more steady. The streets they had always known felt just a touch more vivid, and even the bird song that returned each morning seemed to hum with quiet truths. It was the fog, they realized, that had forgotten them, not the other way around. It had drifted so long between them, it had blurred even its own memory. But now, it remembered. It curled around chimneys like gentle arms. It traced the lines of rooftops like a lover remembering a face. It lingered where it was needed, and lifted where it was not. The lantern's glow was visible now from anywhere in the village. It didn't cast shadows. It revealed them. Shadows not of fear, but of form. Of place. Of belonging. It reminded people that to have a shadow was not to be haunted, but to be here. To be real. Whole. Alive. The old man, still sitting beneath the elder tree, looked out over the village and closed his eyes. The lantern, nestled beside him, pulsed gently, as if breathing with him. And the keeper, sweeping the corners of the sky itself, looked down and smiled. It came not with fanfare, nor prophecy, nor even a whisper from the wind. It was simply a morning like any other in Thistledown, mist curling at the windowsills, the soft shuffle of slippers on worn stone, and the distant murmur of doves nesting in the clock tower. But the old man was not beneath the elder tree. Nor was he walking the lanes with his driftwood cane. The children searched the garden paths, the adults peered from their porches. The keeper swept steadily, not with worry, but with calm, her eyes fixed on the distant house. And when the bell rang, just once, low and long, everyone understood. The old man had gone. Not vanished, not fled, simply passed beyond the need to walk the paths of Thistledown. He had finished his slow blooming here. In his place beneath the elder tree sat the lantern. Still glowing. Still breathing its soft light, not as a farewell, but as a continuation. Around it were tiny white petals, freshly fallen from the elder tree, as though it too had bowed in reverence. No note was left. No instruction. Only the lantern and the silence it carried like a cradle. And beside it, a child. A girl with eyes like dusk and hair that remembered wind. She sat quietly, hands folded, watching the light. No one had told her to be there. But the village did not question it. They simply gathered around the edges of the green, hearts open, breaths soft. The child stood. She did not take the lantern as one takes a thing, but as one receives a story long meant for them. And the moment her fingers closed around its handle, a ripple passed through the air. The house sighed. The shadows blinked. The fog shimmered once. And then, nothing more. Only a new stillness. As if the garden had been gently handed to new hands, and knew it would be well kept. The child did not become the old man. She became herself. But with the lantern by her side, she learned to walk the lanes with steady breath and listening steps. She sat beneath the elder tree in the mornings, not every day, but on days when silence asked for company. And when people came to her, they did not come for answers. They came for presence. For the way she held space. The house remained, though its rooms shifted as needed. New visitors opened new doors. New memories returned home. The room without corners still welcomed those too weary for words, and the keeper still swept with her violet-bound broom, smiling at dust that remembered. The fog never left. But no one wanted it to. It was now understood as something kind, something that softened, rather than obscured. A veil that allowed time to fold gently, so that moments could be carried more easily. A mist that knew when to hold, and when to release. And above it all, the bell in the tower rang once more, not as an end, but as a breath between chapters. No one in Thistledown ever truly spoke of the old man again. But his shadow remained. Not on the ground, but in the quiet courage of those who sat beside someone in silence, in the choosing of slow footsteps, in the carrying of a light not for brightness, but for remembering. And in the evening, if one walked the green near the elder tree and listened closely, they might still hear it. The sound of a lantern glowing. Not with flame, but with stillness. With presence. With time, gently returned. Step inside, the wind brings someone who's lost their glow. A tailor waits with threads of starlight and silence. And a girl finds a way to begin again. Where the cliffs met the sea in a soft, mist-veiled embrace, there stood a small tailor's shop that never appeared in daylight. It was said to open only in the quiet hour between dusk and dream, when the sky turned the color of candle smoke and the stars, just waking, stretched their limbs in silence. No road led directly to the shop. It was simply found. Travelers said they felt it before they saw it, a faint warmth in the chest, like remembering something once loved. Others followed the sound of distant, rhythmic scissors, snip, snip, stitch, snip, snip, stitch, soft as the tide. But none came looking for clothes, and none ever stumbled upon it by accident. It was a place for those whose hearts had grown heavy, not with sorrow, but with something more delicate, a quiet ache, a longing that had forgotten its name. These were the ones the shop opened for. It had no sign above the door, only a window lit by a golden glow, and a small wind chime made of hollow stars that rang like laughter underwater. Inside, the shelves were lined with folded twilight, bolts of skycloth woven with galaxies, jars of thread that glowed softly with colors not found in daylight. There were needles carved from moonbeams, pins made from snowflakes that never melted, and drawers labeled not with sizes, but with dreams. The tailor, a thin man with eyes like old glass and gloves worn through at the fingertips, worked by a single oil lamp. He spoke little. His spectacles were shaped like crescent moons, and his coat was stitched with patterns that moved when no one was looking. He did not mend trousers or sleeves. He mended moments, those invisible tears in time when something had slipped, or gone missing, or quietly unraveled inside the heart. Each night, he waited. He never called out, never asked for company. But when someone stepped through the door, whether led by dream, wind, or some forgotten instinct, he would look up with a knowing nod, as if to say, "Yes, it is your time now." And on one such night, beneath a sky that smelled of sea salt and forgotten wishes, the door opened. And a girl stepped through. She was no older than 16, though her eyes had the distance of someone who had walked too far, for too long, with no map and no promise. Her boots were scuffed, her coat too big, and her hair had the soft disorder of someone the wind had carried for many miles. She held something in her hands, cupped like a bird too fragile for cages. A small, dim star, flickering faintly, its light barely more than a breath. The tailor did not speak. He simply motioned to the stool beside his workbench, a small seat carved from a single piece of driftwood, worn smooth by time and stories. The girl sat carefully, her boots barely touching the floor, her gaze never leaving the fading light in her hands. "I think it's broken," she whispered, voice dry from wind and quiet. "It used to be brighter." The tailor leaned closer, not touching, only observing. He adjusted his moon-shaped spectacles and hummed, a sound like pages turning in a long-forgotten book. "No," he murmured, more to the star than to her. "Not broken. Just tangled." He opened a drawer labeled almost, and withdrew a spool of thread, blue-silver, soft as sighs. The moment the thread neared the star, it pulsed. Once, gently. Then again, steadier. The girl's breath caught. "It remembers you," the tailor said softly. "Stars always do." With careful hands, he threaded a needle carved from glacial light and began to stitch, not into fabric, but into memory. Each pass of the needle shimmered with something unseen, something felt more than watched. The thread wove not just into the star, but into the silence wrapped around the girl's shoulders. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt a little less lost. The tailor worked with the silence of someone who had made peace with the passage of time. His fingers moved gently, looping silver-blue thread through the edges of the dim star, each stitch blooming with the faintest shimmer. The girl sat still beside him, her hands resting on her knees, watching as the broken light took shape within the cloth. He wasn't stitching it onto a sleeve or a coat. No, he was sewing the star into a square of fabric unlike any the girl had ever seen. It was dark as the sky behind the sky, and soft as the first breath after weeping. When she looked at it closely, she could see stars moving across it, tiny lights, traveling in quiet orbits, constellations that shifted with her thoughts. The tailor hummed as he worked. It was a song without words, more feeling than melody, like the hush of waves against stone, or the murmur of leaves remembering a dream. When he finished, he held the cloth out to her with both hands, like one might offer a folded secret. "It isn't a cape," he said, "and it isn't a blanket. It's something in between. Something that listens." The girl took it, unsure. The fabric was weightless. When she placed it over her shoulders, it adjusted itself gently, like it had been waiting for her shape all along. Outside, the wind shifted. Only slightly. But enough to ruffle the grass in the opposite direction. Enough to carry the sound of bells from a village far below the cliffs. Enough for the girl to look up and feel, for just a breath, that she had not come here by chance. "It doesn't protect you from cold," the tailor said softly. "But it does protect you from forgetting." She looked down at the stitched star, now glowing steady near her heart. And for the first time in many nights, her hands stopped trembling. The next evening, the girl returned. This time, she came without hesitation. The shop, waiting in its place between dusk and dream, opened its door for her as if it had never been closed. Inside, the tailor stood beside a high cabinet of many small drawers, all labeled in his fine, slanted handwriting. She did not sit. Instead, she pointed to the uppermost shelf, the one marked storm threads. A place few ever noticed, and fewer still requested. The tailor raised a brow. Not in surprise, but in understanding. "Storm threads," he repeated. "They're not easy to hold. Most tangle themselves into knots the moment they're touched." "I remember something," the girl said, her voice steadier than before. "Or maybe it remembered me." The tailor nodded once, climbed the ladder, and drew down a single thread, gray as thunderclouds, lined with strands of violet and gold. It crackled slightly in his hand, but only for a moment, then quieted, as if sensing it had found its purpose. "This one," he murmured, "was once part of a question no one dared to ask." He placed the thread on the bench, then stepped back. The girl reached out and placed her fingers on it. The thread warmed, then cooled. Then, it pulsed. Images rose around her, not sharp pictures, but impressions, the weight of an unanswered letter, the sound of footsteps leaving, the feeling of standing at the edge of something too wide to cross. She closed her eyes. "I lost something," she said. "A long time ago. I didn't know it was mine, until I realized it wasn't coming back." The tailor did not ask what it was. He simply pulled from a drawer labeled "Return," and began to prepare the cloth. One meant not for healing, but for holding. The tailor lit a second lamp that night. Its glow was softer than the first, tinted silver blue, as though it had been burning inside a shell at the bottom of the sea. The girl stood quietly beside his bench while he laid out the storm thread, careful not to stretch it too tight. Storm threads, he explained, had to be coaxed, not pulled. They carried echoes of unspoken things, and if mishandled, could coil in on themselves and vanish into smoke. The cloth he chose was not black, nor gray, but a color with no name, like the hue of a sky about to cry. As he began to stitch, a hush settled in the shop. Even the jars of glowing thread seemed to dim, as if bowing their light in reverence. With each stitch, the thread sparked faintly, and something shimmered in the air, the scent of pavement after rain, the sound of a door closing gently, the feel of holding someone's name in your mouth long after they'd left. The tailor did not speak. He stitched with a rhythm that was neither fast nor slow, but felt eternal, like the swing of a cradle or the breathing of old trees. The girl sat, watching. As the cloth began to take form, she realized it wasn't just a cloak or a sleeve. It was a tapestry, a patchwork of storm-born memories. Some she recognized, others she didn't. Yet all of them belonged. Not only to her, but to a deeper self that lived somewhere beneath her bones. When he tied the final knot, the thread curled in a small loop, glowing gently. "Place it under your pillow," he said at last. "It won't keep the dreams away, but it will help you walk through them." She took the cloth in both hands and nodded. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the sea. Not in warning, but in welcome. Days passed. Or perhaps it was longer. In the tailor's shop, time moved like fog, slow, circular, and filled with quiet surprises. The girl returned often now. Not every evening, but enough that the chimes above the door began to ring in anticipation of her steps. She did not always bring questions. Sometimes she only came to sit, to listen, to sip tea brewed from stardust and dried petals, sweetened with silence. One evening, as the light faded into a shade too soft to name, she found the tailor seated before a drawer he had never opened in her presence. Its label read, "Unchosen." Inside were threads unlike any others, dull, faded, brittle. Some shimmered once and went dim again, while others looked as though they had never known light. She touched one, and it crumbled. Another, and it recoiled. "These are the threads no one ever picked," the tailor said, his voice almost a whisper. "Paths not walked. Feelings denied. Questions left unasked. Why keep them?" she asked. He smiled gently. "Because sometimes, they're not ready to be chosen, yet." She looked again. And one thread caught her eye. It was simple. Pale gold, wrapped tightly around itself, like a thought afraid to speak. When she touched it, it didn't flicker or crackle. It simply waited. "I think this one was waiting for me," she said. The tailor nodded once. "Then we'll wind it slowly." That night, they didn't sew anything. They simply sat with the thread between them. And for the first time, the girl spoke not of loss, but of possibility. The tailor never hurried a thread, and he did not rush this one. The pale gold filament lay gently across the cloth, untouched, unstitched. For 3 evenings, it simply rested in a small ceramic dish beside the girl while she watched the sea shift beyond the window. It wasn't that they waited for the right moment, it was more that the thread would know when it was time. On the 4th night, the girl placed her hand beside it. And it stirred. Not like a living thing, not quite. But like a thought that had finally reached the surface. The tailor raised his eyes from a piece of constellation-flecked ribbon and gave a single nod. "No pattern," he said. She tilted her head. This thread, he explained, is not meant for plans or designs. It creates itself as it moves. You cannot control it, only follow. She hesitated. What if it leads somewhere I don't understand? His hands, worn and calm, reached across the bench. Then it will carry you back again, gently. And so, they began. The thread moved unlike any she'd seen before, not in lines or curves, but in shapes that bloomed like memory. With each stitch, something inside her softened. Moments she didn't remember living came forward in pieces, the feel of dust on a sunlit windowsill, the sound of her own laughter as a child, the ache of watching someone wave from far away. The tailor stitched in silence, but the girl watched. And somewhere between the 6th and 7th loop of thread, she realized. This wasn't just mending. It was making. Not repairing what had been broken, but creating what had never been given space to grow. And outside, the sky deepened from violet to velvet, stars blinking softly into their places, each one as gentle as a newly spoken word. On the 8th night, the tailor's door opened at a stranger hour than usual. The wind was high. The tide loud. The cliffs hummed with the song of salt and distance. But the girl was already inside, threading tiny stars into a corner of her cloth, and the tailor had just brewed tea that smelled of warmth and memory. And then, bells. Not the chime above the door, but distant bells, carried in on the storm breeze like something from a dream left open too long. The door creaked. And in stepped a figure cloaked in fog. They wore no shoes. Their face was hidden beneath a hood stitched with falling leaves. And though they opened their mouth, no sound came. Not a whisper, not a breath. But in their hands, they held a piece of sky. Frayed. Torn. Still glowing faintly around the edges, like a memory struggling to stay whole. The tailor said nothing. He stood, took the sky fragment with great care, and placed it on the bench. The girl looked at it, eyes wide. It was beautiful, yes, but also trembling. As if it feared being seen too closely. Sometimes, the tailor murmured, we're given someone else's sky to mend. The girl understood. She reached for her pale gold thread, now resting in a quiet spiral. And without a word, she began to sew. The visitors stood still, eyes hidden, but their breath eased. And outside the window, the stars blinked slower. Not dimmer. Just, softer. The girl worked in silence. Her hands moved slowly, not from hesitation, but from reverence. This thread was no longer just her own. It was woven with the weight of another, a stranger who had entered the tailor's shop with a torn piece of sky and no voice to explain it. Yet the sky fragment spoke. Not in words, but in light, in color, in the quiet pull of its tattered edge. It remembered things. Its torn corners shimmered with echoes of grief held too long, of joy once silenced, of songs half-sung and left behind. As she stitched, the girl could feel its longing, not to be whole again, but to be seen in its truth. The gold thread wound gently through the fabric, mending not with precision, but with care. Each loop was a gesture of kindness, each not a pause where breath was allowed to linger. The visitor stood nearby, unmoving. But as the needle passed through the cloth for the final time, something in the air shifted. The sky fragment, no longer trembling, began to glow in full. Not brightly, but with a steady, quiet light. Like a memory that no longer hurt to hold. The girl stepped back, setting down the cloth. The visitor lifted it, cupping it with both hands. And then, for the first time, they smiled. Not wide. Not brightly. But with peace. The tailor, who had not spoken since the visitor arrived, finally gave a small nod. Some stars fall, he said, not because they've failed, but because someone below needed their light. The bells outside fell silent. The storm passed. And in its wake, the visitor stepped out into the soft wind, the cloth held close. Not whole. But held. In the days that followed, the girl came to the shop not only as one who received, but as one who stitched. The tailor said nothing of this change. He merely moved a second stool beside his workbench and lit a second lamp each night. She arrived on her own time, carrying her growing cloth folded neatly under her arm. It was no longer a single patch, nor a square, nor a scarf, it had become something else entirely. A garment with no seams. No pattern. No label. It changed shape depending on how it was worn. When she draped it over her shoulders, it became a shawl. When she placed it across her lap, it became a blanket. And once, when she wrapped it around a small lost bird at her feet, it became a nest. It knows, the tailor said, observing quietly. It's become a part of you. The gold thread had grown softer over time, worn from touch and use, but never dulled. It still shimmered faintly at the edges, curling like breath around the fabric's folds. That night, the girl asked a question she hadn't before. Do you ever sew for yourself? The tailor looked at his own hands, pale and weathered, and shook his head. I don't need to, he said. I have this place. I have the stars. I have the thread that others leave behind. The girl thought about that as she stitched the final edge of her cloth. When she finished, she folded it carefully, pressed it to her chest, and closed her eyes. She did not need to ask what it had become. She already knew. It was not a garment, nor a map, nor a memory. It was a promise. That she could carry what was heavy, gently. And never again alone. Evening came gently. The wind along the cliffs carried no urgency. The sea below moved in long, thoughtful breaths. And in the tailor's shop, the lamps glowed a little softer than usual, as though they too understood something sacred was drawing to a close. The girl arrived just after dusk. She no longer hesitated at the door. Her steps were steady, and she carried her skycloth wrapped around her shoulders, not as a protection, but as a companion. It had changed again. Now it shimmered with a quiet warmth, threaded with memories she had not lived, but somehow remembered. In the folds of its fabric lived comfort, stillness, and the soft kind of courage that comes not from shouting, but from holding space. The tailor was waiting. He stood behind his workbench, but there was no needle in his hand. No thread ready to be wound. The drawers remained closed. Tonight, he simply waited. "You came," he said. The girl smiled, the expression slow and real. It felt like the last evening. He nodded, motioning for her to sit. But this time, she did not take her usual stool. She stepped to the other side of the bench, where the tailor always stood, and placed the cloth gently on the table between them. "I think it's ready," she whispered. He said nothing at first. Only touched the cloth with reverence, his fingers pausing over the soft gold thread, now worn into the shape of her story. "You've stitched your sky," he said at last. "And made space for others within it. Can it be given?" she asked. He looked at her, not with surprise, but with pride. "Yes," he said. "But only once." She folded the cloth one last time, and held it close to her chest. And as she did, a path appeared outside the shop window, not of stone, nor grass, but of small lights, like fallen stars placed carefully along the cliff's edge. They stretched into the night, glowing softly, leading to where sky and sea met the edge of the world. She turned to the tailor. "Will I return?" He smiled faintly. "Not as you are." The door closed behind her with a hush like turning the final page of a beloved book. She followed the starlit path, each step feeling like the answer to a question she hadn't known she'd been asking all along. The sky overhead shimmered, low and kind, and the sea below echoed back the rhythm of her heartbeat. The cloth glowed gently at her side. She reached the cliff's edge just as the wind quieted. And there, waiting, was someone else. A figure, tall, cloaked in silence, holding a torn piece of sky that flickered like an old wish. They did not speak. They didn't need to. With both hands, the girl held out her skycloth. The cloth she had stitched with storm threads and golden questions. The cloth made not only from memory, but from meaning. From presence. From time, honored. The figure took it slowly. And when they did, the stars above blinked slower, as if watching. As if bowing. The girl stepped back. Not empty, but light. And when she looked up, the sky was brighter than it had ever been. In the tailor's shop, far behind her, the lamp flickered once. The tailor sat once more at his bench. A small golden thread appeared in his drawer. And outside, beyond the edges of knowing, a new door opened softly. Waiting. For someone else. To come in from the dark. And begin.